in the United States on international affairs and Ukraine in particular. I'm honored to welcome here the distinguished panelists and good friends of the Kyiv Security Forum and Ukraine. First of all, I warmly present three former US ambassadors to Ukraine: Ambassador John Herbst, Ambassador Stephen Pifer, and Ambassador William Taylor. On Ukraine's side, we have Arseniy Yatsenyuk, Prime Minister of Ukraine in 2014 and 16, and the board of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. I'm also terrified, excited, and pleased to welcome with us and to present our special guest, Melinda Haring, Ukraine's true and committed friend, who together with Ambassador Herbst represents here the Atlantic Council. I thank you, Melinda. So before I turn to our American friends, American panelists, I wish to invite Prime Minister Yatsenyuk to start and to share his points, his understanding from Ukraine's perspective on what's going on in the United States and what we expect to see. The floor is yours, Arseniy.
Well, it's great to have you, everyone, and let me congratulate the American people with the election day. They already made the choice, and we expect that the United States democracy will lead by an example. This is the test for the United States, and this is the test for the free world. And I strongly believe that the US will show its leadership. And as soon as possible, we will know who is to be the next president of the United States. Because Ukrainian people are focused on your elections, sometimes even more than on the local elections in Ukraine. Much depends on who is to be the next president, but it's up to the American people to decide, and that's great. Here is the thing. The incumbent administration had a clear-cut action plan how to work with Ukraine. The key issue was that Ukraine always relied on bipartisan support. So if this administration will be in the office, frankly speaking, I don't expect any kind of dramatic shifts from the present policy. If Vice President Biden is to be elected as the President of the United States, well, he is the student of Europe. He knows Ukraine very well. And he was one of the strongest supporters of the Ukrainian independence. And I do remember when he addressed the Ukrainian lawmakers in the Ukrainian House, he was so vocal, he was so articulate. He really believes that Ukraine has the chance to succeed. And the American people and the American administration do its utmost in order to support the Ukrainians to gain a really strong independence. So as far as I understand, in any case, the new administration has to fix the flaws that we have in our bilateral relations. I would say, what kind of flaws or underdevelopments exist in our bilateral relations? The first and most important, that the US is to show its strong leadership in the entire world and in Europe. And in my humble opinion, that the new administration is to establish with the European Union a high-profile task force to support the Eastern Europe and to support mainly Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, Georgia, to first become the member of the European Union and then to join the NATO. This is to be a kind of new Marshall Plan for the Eastern Europe. And this to be a key priority on the international scene for the new US administration. The second issue is that's crucial for us to have our American partners in the Minsk process. Let me remind you that we had the Geneva format when Americans were part of the way how to restore territorial integrity of Ukraine. Then we shifted to Minsk. The new administration definitely is to consider an option to join the Minsk group or to join the efforts how to press on Russia to implement the Minsk deal and how to restore the territorial integrity of Ukraine. No doubt that the United States is to be the flagship in terms of sanctions against the Russian Federation and pressing on Russia. in order to make everything possible to move Russia out of Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea. I want to reiterate once again that we are not just to focus on Donetsk and Lugansk. Crimea is a part of the Ukrainian state. It's important for us to have a military cooperation between the United States and Ukraine, lethal and non-lethal weapon, in order to defend the Ukrainian mainland, would be a key priority for Ukraine, and we expect that the new administration will be on the same page with the Ukrainian authorities. And let me put another very important issue that I won't say failed, but that we didn't reach. It seems to me that we need to launch an impressive economic agenda between the US and Ukraine. And this economic agenda is to comprise financial sector, industrial sector, anti-corruption efforts, because you can't have investors having corrupted cores or corrupted officials. And definitely we need to improve the rule of law in Ukraine. So I believe that this would be an action plan for Ukraine and US. No doubt that the new president of the United States will be more focused on its domestic agenda. But in terms of international leadership, we expect that the US is to show real strong international leadership with the new president of the United States.
I thank you, Mr. Yatsenyuk. The United States still remains, as what we understand from the news, still remains confronted with the contest between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Dear Melinda, would you be so kind to give us a brief assessment of the post-election situation and what's going on and what to expect now? So Biden wins, or can Trump win? So please share this with the Ukrainian audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Danila. Thank you, Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. It's great to be here with all of you. So this is the summary. Joe Biden is only one state away from winning the U.S. presidency, and it may happen today. You have to have 270 electoral votes to win. He currently has 264. So if he wins one more state, he will become the president. Now, many of these states, the results could be contested in court. Trump is at 214. He would have to win, I think, all 5 remaining in order to become the president. So it's becoming less and less likely. In Georgia, Georgia is one of the big states we're waiting for results on. The biggest newspaper there says that there's 51,000 ballots remaining, and those are in populated areas. So those are expected to be Democratic voters. It's likely that Nevada will probably go Democratic, and that's what will push Joe Biden over the edge. But we're all waiting. We don't know how this election is going to turn out. Now, let me just dig in and say neither option is bad for Ukraine. Even if Donald Trump is reelected, don't freak out. And why do I say that? I believe that one option is much better for Ukraine, but neither option is bad. Donald Trump has an excellent person at the State Department who oversees Ukraine and Russia, and he knows what's going on. He has a great team at the State Department, and I think a lot of the expert community has confidence in the people who are running Ukraine policy at the State Department. Joe Biden will, like the Prime Minister said, Joe Biden knows Ukraine. He's passionate about Ukraine. He knows the elite there. He wants to see Ukraine succeed. So yes, it would be much better for Ukraine's sake if Biden were elected. Now, the United States is very focused on COVID right now. It's really hard to convey how bad it is here. We've all been working from home since March, and everyone is focused on the domestic economy. So even if Biden is elected, and Biden really, really cares about your country, there's not going to be much bandwidth and much focus on foreign policy. All that being said, even if Trump is reelected, support for Ukraine on Capitol Hill is very, very strong, and you can continue to count on that support. Thanks.
Thank you, Melinda. But there is an option which may be bad for Ukraine, and not only for Ukraine, but for the international affairs as well. If the United States goes into some kind of political turbulence or uncertainty, so should we expect that there is a possibility of having some legal procedures that may stop counting the voices and somehow to undermine the results of the elections? Is there any possibility, and what the experts say about the reality of that? How realistic is that possibility?
I think we can expect, so the longer that it takes to get results, the more we can expect protests and people to be unhappy. People really want the results. It's a highly contested election. This is the most people who've come out since 1900. So people are very, very invested in this election. And a lot of these states are going to be contested in court. We don't know which ones yet, but we're going to have to watch this. Democracy is a messy process, and I think our system can be updated, but that's a different discussion for a different day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Melinda, for this brief update. And now I turn to Ambassador Herbst. John, what we saw in the press, the Wall Street Journal says that the portrait of America revealed in Tuesday presidential election was one of a deeply divided nation split. The Washington Post, on the other hand, tell that Americans awake to uncertainty. So we have two difficult perspectives, dangerous perspectives, division and uncertainty. Is it true? Ambassador Herbst, in your opinion, what international implications can be already diagnosed right now, and what Biden's victory means for the world and Ukraine, and what if Trump remains? You're welcome. Can you please switch the mic?
I've been following presidential elections since I was 8 years old in 1960. This is certainly the most passionate election in our history. Excuse me, in my history of watching presidential elections, not our history. The closest analogy is 1968, which had certain similarities, including great debate regarding then the Vietnam War and disorder in the streets. But I'd say the passions are higher today than they were in 1968. So in that sense, it is an interesting moment, as the Chinese define interesting. I suspect, though, that the differences that are evident today in the United States are perhaps more apparent than real. There are significant differences regarding, for example, President Trump. But the expectation that there was going to be a strong Biden and Democrat victory did not pan out. And my personal sense, my personal analysis is that it did not turn out because while Biden is very much a man of the center, center-left, the Democratic Party took a hard turn to the left. And that's why you had the interesting outcome so far that while Biden is beating Trump in the popular vote by 3+ million votes, even doing better than Hillary did 4 years ago, the Republicans have picked up at least 5 seats in the House, and they may lose only 1 or 2 seats in the Senate, even though they had far more vulnerable members voting. What does that all mean? It means that we will have more confusion until we have a new president who's clearly announced, not just by the news organizations, but perhaps by the courts. And then the country will have the task of coming together. I would hope both the Republicans and the Democrats will move towards the center. We're not certain of that, but I suspect it will happen because that's what the American people want. And what this all means for our foreign policy. Certainly when we are so focused domestically, it's harder for us to provide the global leadership that we have provided since 1945. But the simple fact is there's no one else to do it. I think the extraordinary success of China should be acknowledged, but also people are now worried about what China would do if it proved to be the world hegemon. I think people are deeply concerned, which is why in Europe today, Huawei is not welcomed, whereas 2 years ago, the doors were open for Huawei. That's seen as a vehicle for Chinese influence, which is understood to be nefarious. Now, for U.S. policy globally, Trump or Biden, I agree with Melinda. I think that Biden has demonstrated he's a strong transatlanticist, which is very important, and he understands America's stakes in a successful Ukraine. Trump's transatlantic credentials are not quite as strong as Biden's, to indulge an understatement. His support for Ukraine is peculiar, or his policies on Ukraine have been peculiar. But on balance, the United States under President Trump has provided the support Ukraine has needed. And Trump famously, and to my mind positively, made the decision on javelins that Obama refused to make, to his discredit. So I think if Trump wins, it will turn out okay, and even actually better than okay, for our policy in Eurasia, our pushback against Kremlin revisionism, and support for Ukraine. But it won't be as clean, it won't be as rhetorically consistent as if it would be under Biden.
I see him. Ambassador, thank you. So it sounds like, that Ukraine has a win-win situation, if I may say, just for summing up what Melinda told us and what's your point is. I now turn to Ambassador Pifer because, for our audience, for the audience of the Kyiv Security, as very smart audience of the Kyiv Security Forum, and for the Ukrainian audience in general, it is very important to understand what's actually going on in the United States, how to understand deep nature of the grand tendencies we witness right now in your country. So, dear Steve, if I may, please share with us your conclusion. Do you see any kind of major shifts in people's minds in the United States compared to 2016? Do you feel that the Democrats right now can gain control over the Senate, two chambers of the American Parliament, the Senate and the House? And what would that mean for the president-elect and for the foreign policy of the United States? So it is very interesting for us to hear your scenarios. And no less important, was this election, because in Ukraine we talk a lot about that, was this election endangered by Russia's meddling or of any other country as it was in 2016? You're welcome.
Okay, some very good questions. Let me start by saying we're watching 4 states, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, as they count the votes. I have to say that if I was in the Biden camp, I would be a lot more comfortable about the outcome than if I was in the Trump camp. But I think one of the reasons why this process is taking time is in those 4 states, you have election officials who are being very careful about the count so that if there is a legal challenge, and I think the Trump campaign will challenge some of these counts, that they can say that they conducted it in a very precise way. So I think we're looking at a situation where almost very, very likely Joe Biden will be the next president in January. But he will be facing a Senate which will remain controlled by the Republicans. And that creates kind of an interesting situation. I think Democrats will be disappointed about that. But I would remind people that Joe Biden spent a lot of time in the Senate. And I think he's an old guard senator in the sense that he understands the value in working across the aisle. And he has a lot of Republican senators who are actually personal friends. So there may be an opportunity to work in a more bipartisan way. And I think one thing that Mr. Biden has made clear is he would like to sort of close some of the differences that now divide American society. So there is that opportunity for bipartisan work. Now, there is a question here. Mitch McConnell, who will apparently be the Senate Majority Leader, famously said back in 2009 when Barack Obama became president, he said that his main goal was to make sure that Mr. Obama was a one-term president. So will Mr. McConnell be prepared to work in a bipartisan way? And I actually think there's a possibility because the Republicans face in 2022, they have many more of their senators up for re-election than the Democrats do. So gridlock, I think, could actually rebound and have a bad impact on Senate Republicans. So there may be an opportunity, for some bipartisan work, which I think would be good. Let me speak a moment on foreign policy regarding Ukraine, because I guess I would disagree with both Melinda and John, as I do think that there's a big difference for Ukraine, for Europe, for Russia policy between a Biden presidency and a reelected Donald Trump. And that's because if Mr. Trump is reelected, he doesn't have to worry about another election. And I think the Republican Party will be thoroughly beholden to him. And this may be a time when you see his bad instincts come out. And if you look at the last 4 years, what has Mr. Trump's main focus on Ukraine been? It's been trying to extort the Ukrainian president to support his reelection. This is somebody who back in 2015 and 2016 said perhaps Crimea should be recognized as part of Russia. Perhaps we should reduce sanctions on Russia without first asking Russia to correct misbehaviors. I know there's concern among people who've thought a lot about NATO that there would be a serious chance that in a second term, Mr. Trump might withdraw the United States from NATO. And I think that would leave Ukraine in a fairly precarious geopolitical position. So I do see a major difference for Ukraine between this outcome. Happily, I think the votes look like it'll be President Biden in January. And I think that will be good for Ukraine because you will then have an American policy where the president agrees with his administration's policy. We don't have to wake up each morning and say, what was the tweet that sends us off in a new direction? But Biden understands Ukraine. He visited there 6 times as vice president. He's supportive of Ukraine. He's clear-eyed about Russia. And I think obviously his main focus initially is going to be on COVID and the American economy, but you may have somebody who's prepared to engage at a senior level because I think ultimately a solution to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has to be resolved by talking directly to Vladimir Putin. And I think Biden could have that conversation in a way that Trump clearly does not have the background or the willingness to learn the details or the temperament to conduct. On your last question about interference in the American election, it was the conclusion of the American intelligence community that yes, Russia was trying to interfere, was trying to stir domestic differences, but I think in large part because of awareness about what happened in 2016, it did not have the kind of impact that it did have in 2016. So you had no situation like the release of the Democratic National Committee emails. People were waiting for an October surprise. There was this really silly effort by Rudy Giuliani to drag out something about the vice president and his son, and it completely flopped because it was widely seen as Mr. Giuliani pushing a Russian disinformation effort, and it had zero impact. And I think also in Moscow, they could see the polls. The polls turned out to be wrong, but if you were watching the polls a month ago, you probably felt there was a good chance that Joe Biden would be the next president. And my guess is that may have had some kind of moderating influence on the Kremlin. I mean, you don't want to anger the person who's going to be moving into the White House in January.
Right. Thank you, Steve. Here in Kiev, in Ukraine, I would say I would share probably the sense and the feeling of the majority of your friends that we would like to see that the United States comes out from this political competition stronger than it was before. But here we somehow touched upon the Russian problem. Russia tried to play the Ukrainian card in the US presidential election. Have these efforts had any kind of impact upon the overall process? And this question is related to the sense, to the essence of the bipartisan support we enjoy out from the United States. So let me ask Ambassador Taylor about this. Excellency, in your opinion, can Ukraine further rely on the bipartisan support of the American politicians? But here is one very peculiar thing. In your opinion, how should Ukraine's leaders build relations with a new post-election America? And what should be their political and most importantly, moral navigation in these relations? You're welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to join this distinguished crowd here. It's a great opportunity. Steve Pifer just answered part of your question, Danilo. That is, if the Russians tried to do something through Giuliani and through Derkach and that group, he failed. They failed. It did not, as Steve said, it did not have an effect. It was not taken seriously. Now, we all remember year ago where the new Ukrainian government kind of flirted with Mr. Giuliani and almost made a mistake. They pulled back. They figured it out. They took some good advice about not jeopardizing their most valuable asset in the United States, which is, as everyone has indicated here, bipartisan support. And I think your administration, the Zelensky administration, understands that, and that they have made it very clear that they would not interfere in U.S. politics. And so it did not have an effect. And the administration learned that was a bad idea. Now, both Melinda and John have indicated, and Steve as well, that the bipartisan support continues. The problem has not been with the Congress, has not been with the House or the Senate, or the Republicans or Democrats, or the State Department of Defense. But no, that all of those entities, all of those organizations have strongly supported and will continue to strongly support it. There was one problem who didn't support, and that was this irregular channel within not even within the government, but kind of outside the government that we've talked about with Giuliani and some other well-meaning but misguided diplomats, and going up through some people in the White House. That irregular channel does not represent U.S. policy toward Ukraine. U.S. policy toward Ukraine is very clear, and it will be continued. And I agree with Melinda, John, and Steve about how that will continue under either one. Melinda's right. Mr. Trump has maybe doesn't know very well, but he has a very strong advocate, Ukraine advocate in Steve Biegun, the Deputy Secretary of State. And if there's some minor chance, small chance that Mr. Trump continues, then Steve Biegun will continue to do what he is doing in the regular channel, in the U.S. Foreign policy regular channel. In the more likely event, as Steve Pifer indicates, President Biden has some very strong advisors who also know and care deeply about Ukraine, and that will continue. So I think that now your question, Danilo, about what a new administration should do, it's a very good question. It needs to commit to the reform that is started and stopped and is now facing a major crisis that everybody on this call knows about with the Constitutional Court. That challenge, that crisis, that problem is a problem for U.S.-Ukrainian relations. It's a problem for Ukrainian-European relations. It's a problem for Ukraine-IMF relations. The focus on and the continued commitment to reform is going to be very important for the next administration and will be important for this administration, for your administration, for the Zelensky administration to address right up. I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for President Zelensky to take this challenge, make this crisis an opportunity to bring people together, to recommit to a judicial reform, a big judicial reform. This is an opportunity that he can pull people together in the Rada from various parts of the Rada. I mean, various parties. There are people who can be committed with strong leadership. And that's what we'll need. So I am optimistic that we will be able to move forward on this basis.
William, I do appreciate your words, and I like it very much to take this challenge, but not the irregular channel. This is 100%. If I may, and I'm really serious right now, on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum, on behalf of my colleagues from the Ukrainian Diplomatic Service, I would like to thank you and to thank Ambassador Mary Yovanovich for your position full of dignity, self-esteem, and for your true commitment to Ukraine-US bilateral relationship. We admire this, we remember this, and we thank you for this.
That's very kind. Thank you. Thank you.
I do appreciate it. Now I turn to my good friend, Valeriy Charley, Ambassador Charley. You are one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most successful Ukraine's ambassadors to the United States. You should be proud of your impressive legacy, which was widely acknowledged within the expert community here in Ukraine, among the politicians, if not the current political leadership in Ukraine. But we appreciate your view, and we would like to hear, and our audience would like to hear your opinion. Sooner or later, the emotions will come down and the results of the US presidential election will be officially finalized. What do you think? What should be the concrete initiatives that Ukraine has to bring to the common table? And should we strive for some higher political level dialogue or should we be more practical and focus on some groundwork? So what scenarios you keep in mind? You're welcome.
Thank you, Danilo, and it's a great pleasure and honor to be together in this Kyiv Security Forum discussion. Congratulations, Arsenij Yatsenyuk, this keeping this format. It's very important for us to have this political dialogue among United States and Ukraine and other our partners. Danilo, you're absolutely right. Now ball on our side, because despite of some turbulences, political turbulences in the United States, we understand that we are the country who is most interested in the development of our strategic partnership. So we need to do many things. I agree completely with Ambassador Taylor. We should finish our reforms and we should find good solutions in our political crisis, but more important, to propose agenda for our foreign policy and especially with the United States. What I see now, to restore our dynamic of our relationship at the highest and high level. I'm very unhappy that we do not have meeting between our presidents. And I hope that we will have it after the election in the United States. I believe we will restore our dynamic and activity of our Strategic Partnership Commission format. Despite of coronavirus, we need to intensify our expert group. It's a group of disarmament, group of export control, group of security issues, energy, economy. I agree with Arsenij Yatsenyuk completely. That's time to make real steps to deepen our strategic partnership with the United States. We need to not maintain, but restore a very intensive dialogue among our parliament. I agree with Ambassador Pifer that we need also keep focus on Congress, not only on the leadership. I mean, the White House, if we will be in the White House, because composition of this new landscape, political landscape, very important for us. If we have more cooperative Congress with the president, if we have, for example, Mr. Biden, who will lead the executive power, and Democrats who will support by Friends of Ukraine in the Senate, we will have a more active role and more dynamic relationship with the United States. But most important for Ukraine to understand, we need United States. I want to use this opportunity to thank you so much for your continuous support, 700 million aid every year for reforms and security. I believe we need to discuss other lethal weapons for Ukraine. We need to discuss how to be prepared for next challenges, and this is a real time for meeting our military guys, our diplomats, our parliamentarians, and executive power. So a very simple answer, more dynamic of our relationship with the United States.
Good. Thank you, Valeriy. Thank you for this opinion, for this assessment. We need the United States, but not only Ukraine needs the United States. And now I turn to the second part of our discussion, and let me start from asking Melinda. Obviously, the US presidential election is of great international significance. Look at our region. The east of Europe needs the involvement of the United States. Belarus with civil uprising and national uprising, which is coming. Moldova and Georgia with very dramatic and interesting and elections with that may bring about far-reaching results that may change the political landscape in those countries. Each of our nations, including Ukraine, with our own problems with the constitutional crisis and other issues. So go now through new and apparently very dramatic challenges. Don't you find that now this is the particular moment that the US should do more to protect the Euro-Atlantic aspiration of this part of Europe? And most importantly, can the United States do it? And what should be, in your opinion, Ukraine's role in that process?
Thanks for giving me the hard question, Daniil. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You know I love you.
I'm up for it. Okay, yes, of course, the United States should, this is the moment we should seize it, but is it politically feasible? And unfortunately, I think the answer is no. The ambassadors may disagree with me. It doesn't matter if Biden wins or if Trump wins. The unemployment numbers are bad in the country. COVID is bad in the country. People are very internally focused right now on their schools, on getting back to work. Yes, if Biden is elected, he's very interested, as we've all talked about, in Ukraine, and he is an internationalist. He believes in NATO. He believes in our alliances. So that's going to be a big part of his foreign policy. But he's going to be constrained, and I think we should be open about that. There's not going to be very much that we can do, at least in the first year, in terms of foreign policy. But honestly, even if he is constrained, Biden can do nothing, and that's good for Ukraine. If he continues the javelin policy, if he continues the amount of support that the U.S. has been giving Ukraine, that's a good thing. If he doesn't touch NATO and he doesn't undermine NATO, that's a good thing. Doing nothing is better than what has been done, over the past couple of years in terms of for Ukraine. On Belarus, I'm disappointed that the U.S. hasn't done more. I think we need to have full-throated support for the people of Belarus. Our response has been pathetic. I know the ambassadors are going to say that I'm too hot-headed, but these mealy-mouthed statements don't work. We have nothing to lose. This is a very clear moral issue. We should come out in full support for the people of Belarus, and we should definitely look at increasing the number of sanctions. We haven't done enough, and I know there's some creative people in the State Department who would like to do more. And if Biden is elected, I know that we will do more on Belarus. On Georgia and Moldova, I'm gonna send that question to John Herbst. I'm not up to speed on the details in Moldova. Thanks.
I do appreciate it. Thank you, Melinda. But before we turn to Georgia and Moldova, let's clear up some things related to Ukraine. We have to stand up to the challenges we face. That's true. And if I may, I wish to address this question to Ambassador Pifer. Ukraine has recently held the local elections, though they still count the voices. But nevertheless, immediately after them, our domestic political situation was severely hit by the notorious verdict of the Constitutional Court, which, as the experts say, eventually may endanger the whole anti-corruption architecture in Ukraine. However, the reaction of President Zelensky was, I even actually don't know how to describe that reaction. It's quite controversial, I would say, not very realistic in some sense. But nevertheless, for me, there is no surprise that his reaction was as it was. So how this constitutional drama that we face right now in Ukraine looks from the United States perspective? Steve, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let me first say, I think people in America saw the local elections as a good thing. Everything that we've seen said that those elections were conducted in a free and fair manner. And it's also important because these are elections that now have local governments that have more authority than in the past. I know when I was in Kyiv 20 years ago, one of the things we said was the importance of decentralizing power, pushing authority down to the regional local levels. And my guess is that both Ambassador Herbst and Ambassador Taylor passed the same message. So that decentralization, I think, is a good thing. Of course, there's been a lot of attention, I think, from Ukraine watchers in America now devoted to what's happened with the Constitutional Court. I think those developments, the decisions by the court last week are very worrisome. And they have potentially some very negative consequences for Ukraine. Now, the program with the International Monetary Fund now, I think, is completely frozen. The IMF will see this as moving back from the basis for the program that was agreed last spring. That will endanger European Union funding for Ukraine. And I think you've even seen some in the European Union say this could put at risk the visa-free travel that Ukrainians now enjoy to the Schengen zone in the European Union. So there are some, I think, potentially some very negative consequences. And it seems to me that the dilemma that President Zelensky faces is, how do you deal with a court that seems to be a huge impediment to Ukraine's reform course? And the question is, can he find a way to do it that is legal? And this may be, I think there's a certain tension here between, a very real political problem to remove an obstacle to reform, and then finding the way to do that is consistent with Ukraine's constitution and Ukraine's legal norms. And that, I think, is the challenge that faces President Zelensky. My sense is among Ukraine watchers is we would like to see steps taken so that the Constitutional Court does not be a block to reform and does not walk back other reforms, as has been suggested. And ideally, that can be done in a way that is consistent with Ukraine's constitution and legal structures.
Appreciate, Steve. And now I turn to Ambassador John Herbst. Continuing the line we already started with Melinda, which is related to the situation in Moldova and Georgia, and I would like to know your opinion on the developments in these extremely important for Ukraine two nations, and not only for Ukraine but for the West and for Eastern Europe. But also there is another highly important matter that definitely should be mentioned today at our discussion: Russia and Russian track. So two questions: Georgia and Moldova and Russia. Not very simple. You're welcome.
Okay. Look, I think the developments in Georgia have been largely positive, but not entirely. I mean, they did hold an election based upon the new rules where 80% of the people to be chosen for their parliament were done on a proportional list system as opposed to the single voter district. And that's a good thing. By and large, the elections were free and fair, but there were violations. And of course, the opposition reacted strongly to the fact that their performance was not as strong as could have been. I think that's just something which is also understandable. But on balance, it was another step towards reaffirming Georgia's democracy, although still needed to be improved democracy. As for Moldova, and actually the last point on Georgia, the United States is able to work with all the major parties in Georgia, so we can continue working with the party which Mr. Ivanishvili more or less controls, even if he's not in office. As for Moldova, I think Maya Sandu had a pretty good election, first round of election, so now she's in a runoff with Mr. Dodon. How this will play out, we don't know. We know that the democratic-minded, Western-minded groups in Moldova, who Sandu leads, have the ability to unite and I think win a majority. But sometimes, while they may have the ability, it's not so easy to do. So you have to watch very carefully her relations with her principal colleagues in that movement, especially Mr. Nastasi. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, the Kremlin's playing a malign influence in Moldova, and we have to expect that to continue. And of course, the people of Moldova need to make a firm choice of their own in favor of a westward orientation, which I think is in the country's interests. But again, that's their choice, not ours. As for Russia, Mr. Putin continues to pursue revisionist policies, challenging American interests globally. We maintain a strong interest in pushing back against his aggressive foreign policy. Whatever President Trump actually thinks, his administration has done that. I have no doubt that if Mr. Biden wins, that he will do that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, with greater consistency between the policy and his rhetoric, and with greater and welcome emphasis on better transatlantic relations, where I think Mr. Trump was negligent. Although you have to credit Trump with persuading Europe for the first time to increase their defense outlays. So you have to give him his due for that. Anyway, my sense is that Moscow would prefer a Trump victory, although they don't have high hopes because those hopes were frustrated during his first term. And I think that they already made some signals starting in late September that they would want to work with Biden, assuming he became president. Mm-hmm. But again, I think our policy will be one of pushback toward Kremlin aggression, no matter who wins, although it will be stronger and more consistent if Biden is the next president.
John, do you expect that if President Biden's win, we will have an additional impetus in terms of the Donbas track and Crimean issue, the whole basket of issues related to the war which was waged against Ukraine by Russia. Do you think that there will be an additional energy that can move the peace process, and can the Ukrainian leaders rely on this possibility? Today we had a chance to read the so-called Leonid Kravchuk plan with some new additional peace solutions. The general idea is that nobody knows how realistic is what is written in that plan. But nevertheless, what we understand, and this is extremely important, that Ukraine stick to its peace commitment and would like to see the peace process moving as quick as possible. Do you think that if Biden comes, there would be another additional window to speak with? I mean, to expose additional pressure on Russia? You're welcome.
I'm not certain that Biden's win would mean more pressure on Russia. I don't rule it out, but I also don't rule that out if Trump is reelected. As all my colleagues have already mentioned, congressional support, Democrat and Republican, for Ukraine against Kremlin's nasty foreign policy remains strong. I think, in fact, it might make sense to work more there to achieve tougher American sanctions than to work through the administration. But again, if Biden wins, I think you'll see people in senior positions who all understand our interest in defeating Moscow and Donbass. But a thing that I think you understand, and I think most Ukrainians understand, that Ukraine is the principal obstacle to Moscow and Donbass, not the United States. We are important, but secondary. But I think that we will, again, continue our strong support no matter who sits in the White House.
I thank you. Now I turn to Ambassador Charlie. As we look at the picture, we do understand that, and this is actually my question to you, don't you find that Russia may use the momentum of, I would say, some kind of political uncertainty in the United States and to go ahead with some additional risks and provocations, including against Ukraine? What risks do you see in the coming weeks and months? The floor is yours.
Thank you. We're in a war with Russia for a long time, and the United States now understand very clear what's the nature of Russian attack against Ukraine. As ambassador, we discussed that in the United States, not with ambassadors, my friend, they understand very good situation, but with many people in Washington in 2015. So how not provoke Putin? Because if we provoke Putin to make Ukraine stronger, to give additional weapons, it will lead us to the new escalation. Now we all understand the more strong Ukraine, it's a peace, and weak Ukraine is a continuous this force of Russia and aggressive steps. So I believe Putin did not have such an opportunity that had before, but Russia did not stop this attack in the different ways, including cyber attacks, and it's now more under control in the United States and in Ukraine. Thank you for our cyber dialogue. And very important to be strong partners in that. From Ukrainian side, not sign some memorandum with companies of other countries, third countries under sanctions. That's the wrong way. But continuous support our cyber dialogue and waiting for intensify our practical steps to be ready for new challenges. I'm not sure that Russia will try to use this opportunity now, but definitely they will continue use weaknesses of Ukraine in the future. So the main thing to be strong enough to consolidate political nation, to improve our governance, to be ready for such challenges. And second thing, not less important, but probably most important, it's our security and defense. Our capabilities in Navy, now we improve after the receiving island class ships from the United States. We receive javelins, but it is not enough. We need to be more equipped, need to be more strong, our not only Navy, but also our air forces and army. And if we be ready enough, if we receive such support from the United States, I believe this will have bipartisan and bicameral support and in Congress and support by President of the United States, we will be ready with any challenges. So the simple answer, I'm not sure this is would be now, but it's possible in the nearest future. If Russian leadership, President Putin, will see less partnership among us, but it's impossible. I think we will have more partnership, and we will demonstrate that Ukraine implement new sanctions, United States implement new sanctions. By the way, Mr. Biden mentioned before day of election day, he mentioned that Russia remain one of the main opponents of the United States. And I believe the United States will be strong enough to demonstrate to any aggressor in the world the wrong way to deal in the geopolitical stage. We do not allow anybody, I mean we as a partners with the United States, we do not, and our European partners, do not allow anybody to destroy international order, to interrupt every international law position. And Ukraine very appreciative support and count on continuous the support from the US, and in that case, we'll be ready to stop Russian aggression and not discuss any period of opportunity of the next aggression step by Russia.
Thank you, Valeriy. This is one of the most important points of our discussion. That Ukraine should stay strong, should not be ambiguous, should not play with the enemy, but to do everything possible proactively to unite the coalition, which was established also by our own efforts in 2014 and 19. But now I turn to Ambassador Taylor, and I will put almost the same question to you, Excellency. What are the major risks you see in the near and middle term?
Danilo, as several people have said, Russia is at war with the West. Ukraine is on the front line. The West, in particular the United States, Europe, should support Ukraine in that war through sanctions, through military assistance, through weapons, the full range that we've talked about. But another part of that challenge, another part of that war that the Russians are waging, and in the first instance against Ukraine, is through Russian influence, dominated, controlled oligarchs in Ukraine. That together with other oligarchs who don't have Ukraine's main interest at heart is, I think, behind the problem with the Constitutional Court crisis, which I mentioned earlier as being important for U.S.-Ukraine relations. So this Russia aggression in various domains, I think, is the main risk. And it's a risk to the IMF, it's a risk to the European relations. Default is a possibility. This would greatly weaken Ukraine. So Ukraine's on the front line. We should support it. And that's the big risk in that part of the world that we should look at.
Thank you. And now I would like to invite Arseniy Yatsenyuk to make his concluding remarks. This is the picture, and the picture is dramatic, but the picture is very interesting, full of the opportunities, in my opinion. Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Well, on the one hand, we are living in a very dramatic times. On the other hand, these are amazing times, and these times gives us a chance and opportunities. And we have to use this time in order to become stronger. The good news is that, and I want to remind the Ukrainian audience, that the American people elected not only the President of the United States, but they elected the Senate members and the members of the House. So an amazing news is that for the first time in the history of the US Congress, a woman of Ukrainian descent, she was born in Ukraine, was elected as a congresswoman. And she represents the Republican Party. So I strongly believe that this is the chance to have a very strong bipartisan support of all Ukrainian initiatives in the new US House. On the other hand, frankly, we do have a lot of similarities between Ukraine and the United States. And the next president of the United States will have a very challenging job. It's going to be a very hard toil to unite the nation, to bridge the differences that you have in the United States, to tackle an economic crisis, to fight with the pandemic. And this is the copycat stuff for the Ukraine. We are all in the same situation. No doubt that the next president of the United States will protect, defend, and preserve the Constitution of the United States, and he will serve to the American people. And it's in the best interest of the American people to have strong Ukraine, because you and we are fighting for our independence. We are fighting for the best of our people. We are fighting against the autocrats and dictators like President Putin. So the stronger Ukraine is, the stronger the United States will be. The more secure Ukraine, the better security will be for the American people. And that's very important for the next president of the United States to reestablish a very strong alliance with our European friends, I mean with the European Union and with the European countries, to rejoin a number of initiatives. And once again, the US was, is, and will be the leader of the free world. You guys have to bear the brunt of the leadership, and you have guts and stamina to show to the entire world that you are the real flagship of the democracy.
I thank you. I thank you, Mr. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, for these words. And finally, let me thank you all for such an interesting and very important debate and discussion that I believe was enjoyed by our followers, our audience. You know, I remember the speech, the address of Vice President Biden in Ukraine's Rada. That was a manifesto of dignity, and that dignity is required right now, not only for Ukraine, but all over the world, including the United States. So we keep our fingers crossed for the victory of democracy in the United States, for you being strong. Let's stay strong and united. And God bless Ukraine, and God bless the United States. I do thank you. Дуже дякую вам.
Thank you.